Anything that happens on earth gets its cue from heaven.
This is Father Neil Edlin. I'm the rector of Mary Magdalene Church, Mary Magdalene Anglican Church in Orange, California. And I'm here with Father Paul Castellano, longtime friend and also now author. He's a priest in the United Episcopal Church of North America. And we're here today to talk about his upcoming book that he's about ready to have released sometime in the new year. It's called As It Is in Heaven. And it is a book. I'm going to let him explain, tell you what it's all about. But essentially, he's written a book about worship. And so we'll start with that, and I'm going to ask you just directly, what is this book about?
Excellent. How you doing, Father?
Great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for the interview. It's a long time coming, I guess, for you and I.
Yeah.
Essentially, the book, in a nutshell, involves a discussion about the church. But anytime you wind up discussing the church, you have to discuss the elements of the church, such as how is the church organized? Within that organization, how are we to worship? Because that organization is commanded to worship God. Then when you talk about how worship is conducted or prosecuted, we have to talk about who are the individuals that are leading the worship of that church. So those are the core elements of what the book addresses. But the undergirding foundation is where in Scripture and historical theology as well, where do we get the information as to how and why this form that I'm discussing, where does it derive? And that's why the title of the book is As It Is in Heaven.
Okay. All right. So that leads me to believe that the foundation of worship is found in heaven.
That's
the blueprint.
Yeah,
or
that would
model?
be. Yeah, if one were to engage in any discussion today, especially when it comes to dealing with issues in the church, you're going to encounter a number of differences, obviously. But all of those differences are predicated upon one concept, and that concept is there's nothing in the New Testament that specifically commands us to look at one particular form of church organization. Jesus and the apostles, as the argument goes, never gave us specific directions as to how the church was to be set up. Is it supposed to be Presbyterial in structure? Is it supposed to be congregational, elder rule versus Episcopal rule? So that is the first question that I address. And whereas that's the common understanding, I believe that while there are elements of that are accurate, I think it attempts to say too much because substantively, I think that's flawed. And that's what the book addresses, that even though we don't see anything specific, we do have a very clear-cut example as to how all of these things are to be prosecuted on earth, and that example is heaven. Mark Vanderhart from Mid-America Reformed Seminary, an Old Testament prof there, has made the statement on a number of occasions that anything that happens on earth gets its cue from heaven. So when we look at heaven as our starting place versus where contemporary Christianity usually starts, and that can be anywhere. Contemporary Christianity will usually begin this conversation either in the early church, or they'll be, house churches, whatever that means, because they generally misunderstand what an actual house church was. But they start in house churches, or maybe the synagogue, or maybe the temple, or even, the enterprising thinker will go back, well, maybe it's the tabernacle. Well, in actuality, the form of the church in general, in its broadest scope, And then all of those things that we mentioned, organization, worship, well, it actually begins in the creation narrative.
The garden.
Yeah. And in one sense, it even antedates, it precedes the garden, because what we see is this heavenly imposition of a triadic or a three-part structure that undergirds everything to follow. For instance, when we come to the early chapters of the creation narrative, what do we see? Well, we see the days of creation. But when you look at the days of creation, how are the days of creation set up? Well, they're actually set up in one encompassing triad that's broken down into two smaller triads. Example, you have days 1, 2, and 3. What do we have in that first triad? Well, we have in that first triad Yahweh creating kingdoms.
Okay.
Kingdom of light, kingdom of earth, kingdom of light, air, earth, water, the kingdom creation.
Yeah.
Well, days 4, 5, and 6, what do we see? That's the second triad. Well, we have the creation of kings. Who rules over,
Sure.
who rules over the day? The sun and the moon rule over the day and the night. We have animals and birds ruling over the land. Then we have
Mankind.
mankind. And then the last one, the last element of that broader comprehensive triad is the seventh day. And that's where, man is created, God rests. So God rules over all of it. So within the very creation narrative, we see this three-part structure set up. And then we get into Eden, where if you look at material by John Walton, T.D. Alexander, and others, you see they lay out the fact that Eden actually was a temple sanctuary. It was an elevated temple sanctuary. We know that based upon the fact of the description of the rivers, the Tigris, the Euphrates, they flow down and out from. So you have the temple sanctuary, and then what do you have? Then you have the garden itself, which is where Adam and Eve ministered and worshiped God. And then you have their responsibility to take this to the outer world. So there you have the tripartite example there. And that goes all the way through. And for the person that's actually listening to this and has done their due diligence and done their homework, I'm sure they're already starting to think of, oh yeah, there are a number of other places where that Mount Sinai, where you have the three levels of Mount Sinai. Sure. The bottom level with the Jews, the middle level with Aaron and the elders, and then the top level where Moses meets God in his mobile throne. And then you have the tabernacle, and we can go on and on. Noah's Ark, the three levels of Noah's Ark. So this concept of how heaven informs what we do on earth begins all the way back in creation. And of course, how we understand what's taking place in heaven will have to come through the interpretive grid of Moses. But if we begin on Sinai, we see that interpretive grid was already given to him by Yahweh, because the blueprint was interpreted by Yahweh to say, this is what my heavenly kingdom looks like. I'm giving it to you, and the way you're going to implement this heavenly kingdom on earth is this way. So Yahweh actually interpreted all of what took place in heaven for Moses, and Moses just gave it to us.